They didn't put a sign on it. They didn't need to. Everyone who worked at La Costa knew which table it was. The corner booth, half-shadowed, curved leather pressed against a brick wall old enough to remember blood. The one with the best sightline of the room and the worst reputation in the city. Table 9. The staff had a name for it, whispered only when the dishwasher drowned out their voices. The grave. Not because people died there, though sometimes they did, but because once you were noticed at that table, the rest of your life had a way of ending quietly. Every Thursday night, just before 8, the restaurant shifted. The laughter dulled first, then the clink of silverware slowed. Wine glasses stopped refilling themselves. Shoulders tightened, eyes lowered. Fear moved faster than any maitre d'. Angelica felt it every time, like a pressure change before a storm. She stood behind the service station, rolling her shoulders, adjusting her apron strings for the third time that night. The fabric was frayed where bleach had eaten it thin. Her shoes pinched at the heels. Her feet already ached in the familiar way that told her she'd be limping tomorrow morning. She didn't complain. Complaints didn't pay rent. Angelica had learned early how to disappear without actually leaving, how to move through rooms without being remembered, how to listen without being invited into the conversation. She had learned how to survive. The manager, Paolo, wiped his hands on his slacks for the 4th time in a minute. Sweat had darkened the collar of his white shirt. "He's early," someone whispered. Angelica glanced toward the front doors just as they opened. 2 men entered first. Not loud, not aggressive, just wide enough to block the light behind them. Their eyes moved constantly, not darting, not nervous, measuring. Then he stepped in. Thomas Moretti didn't wear a coat despite the cold outside. His suit was dark, simple, tailored so well it looked like it belonged to his body instead of hanging on it. No visible jewelry. No watch anyone could see without standing too close. He didn't scan the room. He already knew who was in it. Conversation collapsed into silence around him like a held breath. The piano player's hands faltered, then stilled completely. Glasses froze midair. Thomas walked to table 9, sat, unfolded his napkin. That was the cue. Paolo turned, panic flickering across his face as he scanned the staff. Servers avoided his eyes like he was carrying a disease. "Not her. Angelica," he hissed, grabbing her elbow. "You're up." She looked at him. "No," she said calmly. "I had 9 last week." Paolo swallowed. "Rick's? In the bathroom? Again?" "He's throwing up." Angelica followed Paolo's gaze to the booth. Thomas hadn't looked up yet. He never did. To him, servers were part of the furniture. Useful, replaceable, invisible. "I'll cover Rick's section," Angelica said. "Someone else can." Paolo shook his head, frantic. "No one else will go." That was the truth. Angelica exhaled slowly. She thought of the envelope on her kitchen table. The one stamped "Final Notice." She thought of her mother's voice on the phone that morning, trying to sound brave about test results neither of them understood yet. She thought of how fear had never once solved her problems. "Fine," she said. She picked up the water pitcher and walked toward the one place in the room where everyone else refused to stand. The closer she got, the heavier the silence became. Even the air felt different near table 9. Charged, expectant, dangerous. Thomas still hadn't looked up. Angelica stopped at the edge of the table. Posture straight, shoulders relaxed. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't apologize for existing. "Good evening," she said evenly. Still or sparkling? It wasn't loud. It wasn't defiant. It was just normal. That was what made it dangerous. Thomas's fingers paused on the napkin, just for a fraction of a second, but Angelica saw it. He lifted his head. His eyes were dark, sharp, unreadable. Not angry, not curious. Assessing. Most people folded under that gaze. They stammered, they rushed, they shrank. Angelica didn't. She met his eyes the way you meet a stranger on a train. Aware, neutral, unafraid. "Still," he said finally. "No ice." She nodded once. Of course. She turned and walked away. She didn't bow. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. Behind her, Paolo looked like he was about to pass out. Angelica didn't know it yet, but something had shifted. Not in the room. In Thomas Moretti. When she returned with the water, he was watching her. Not the way men usually watched her. Not possessive, not dismissive. Curious in the way people get when a pattern breaks. She poured smoothly, hands steady. "You're new," he said. "I've been here 8 months," Angelica replied. "You just never looked up." The words landed harder than a slap. One of the guards tensed. Thomas lifted a finger slightly. The guard froze. Angelica placed the glass down with quiet precision. "What's your name?" Thomas asked. "Angelica," she said. "I'll give you a few minutes with the menu." "I won't need it." She waited. "Osso buco," he said. "And the Barolo." "We're out of that vintage," she said. "I can recommend another." Paolo made a choking sound from across the room. "You didn't tell Thomas Moretti you were out of anything." Silence stretched. Thomas studied her like a puzzle that refused to behave. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Recommend," he said. Angelica did. And for the first time in years, Thomas Moretti smiled. Not because he was amused, because someone had spoken to him like he was human, not a god, not a devil, and hadn't died for it. Neither of them noticed the men entering the restaurant until it was already too late. Angelica sensed it before she heard it. The shift wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of instinct that lived low in the spine. The same one that made animals bolt seconds before the ground shook. The front doors opened too fast. Not the controlled entry of Thomas Moretti's men. Not the cautious curiosity of tourists. This was chaotic. Sharp. Wrong. The first scream came from the left side of the dining room. The second sound was glass exploding. Angelica turned just as the first gunshot tore through the air. Panic detonated instantly. Chairs screeched backward. Wine glasses shattered. Someone knocked over a table, silverware screaming across the floor. The piano bench flipped as the pianist dove for cover. Angelica's mind did not freeze. It narrowed. 3 men. Leather jackets. Not Italian. Not subtle. Weapons already raised. They weren't there to make a statement. They were there to end something. Angelica's eyes snapped to table 9. Thomas Moretti was still seated. Not frozen. Not confused. Still. That was when Angelica understood something no one had ever told her. Men like him didn't panic. They calculated. But calculation takes time. Bullets don't. "Down!" she shouted. Her voice cut through the chaos sharp enough to split it. Thomas turned toward her just as the first burst of gunfire shredded the wall behind him. Brick exploded outward in a cloud of dust and splinters. Angelica moved. She grabbed his shoulder and shoved with everything she had. Thomas hit the booth hard, leather groaning under his weight. Angelica lost her footing and went down with him, the world erupting into noise and smoke. Bullets chewed through the table where his head had been a second earlier. The smell hit her next. Cordite, burned wood, fear. She curled instinctively, hands over her head. Then the return fire started. Thomas's guards moved like machines. Controlled. Lethal. Efficient. 3 shots. Then 2. Then silence so sudden it felt like her ears were ringing from its absence. Angelica lifted her head slowly. The men who had stormed in lay sprawled across the dining room floor. Blood pooled beneath them, creeping across tile like spilled ink. Someone sobbed behind her. Someone else vomited. Thomas pushed himself upright. He looked around once. Twice. Then his gaze dropped to Angelica. She was shaking now. Her hands trembled violently, adrenaline burning out of her veins. A thin line of blood trickled down her cheek where a shard of glass had caught her skin. Thomas stared at it. "You pushed me," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was stunned. "You were sitting there," Angelica replied, breathless. "They were aiming at your head. For a long moment, he didn't respond. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a white handkerchief, pressed it gently against her cheek. His touch was careful, almost reverent. People noticed. That was when Thomas Moretti did something no one expected. He stood. The room recoiled instinctively. "Paolo?" he said. The manager appeared from behind the bar like a condemned man answering a summons. "Yes, Mr. Moretti." "Fire her." Angelica froze. "What?" Paolo croaked. "Immediately," Thomas said calmly. "She no longer works here." Angelica's shock burned hot, fast. "You can't," she said. "I just—" Thomas turned his eyes on her. And in that look, she saw it. Not punishment. Protection. "If I see her here again," he continued, voice steady, "I will close this place." Paolo nodded frantically. "Yes, yes, sir." Thomas turned away from her without another word. His men closed in around him, guiding him toward the back exit before the sirens, already wailing in the distance, could arrive. Angelica stood alone in the wreckage. Her apron was stained with wine and blood. Her cheek burned. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had just saved the most dangerous man in the city, and he had taken her job. She felt something crack inside her chest. Not fear, not anger. Betrayal. As the doors swung shut behind Thomas, something slid across the table. An envelope. She grabbed it and spun, intending to hurl it after him. The weight stopped her. It was thick. She hesitated, then opened it. Stacks of $100 bills stared back at her. $10,000. More money than she had ever held in her life. Her stomach twisted. Inside the envelope was a small, cream-colored card. A phone number. One word written in elegant, deliberate handwriting. "Tomorrow." Angelica stuffed the envelope into her bag. Heart pounding. She didn't go home. She took the subway north instead, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks failing to drown out the echo of gunfire still ringing in her ears. By the time she reached the hospital, the sky was already lightening. Her mother was asleep, tubes humming softly beside her. Angelica sat at the bedside and counted out the cash with trembling fingers. This would cover the surgery. It would buy time. But time wasn't safety. Outside the hospital, Angelica pulled the card from her pocket. Tomorrow. It was already tomorrow. She dialed. The line rang once. "Angelica Miller," a voice said. "A car is on the way. 2 minutes." "I didn't give." "We know," the voice replied. "Please wait outside." The line went dead. Angelica stared at the phone. 2 minutes later, a black sedan rolled to the curb. She got in. She didn't know where she was going. Only that walking away wasn't an option anymore. Not after she had broken the silence. Not after Thomas Moretti had finally looked up. The car smelled like leather and something metallic underneath it. Angelica noticed details like that. She always had. The way a room smelled before something went wrong. The way voices changed when lies entered the air. The way silence could be louder than shouting. The driver didn't speak. Neither did the man in the passenger seat. They drove for nearly 40 minutes, leaving the city's glow behind, slipping into an industrial stretch of warehouses and fenced-in yards. The streets emptied. The buildings grew taller, blinder, less interested in pretending to be welcoming. Angelica kept her hands folded in her lap. Fear didn't help. Observation did. The car rolled through a gate without stopping. Cameras tracked their movement. Armed men nodded once and looked away. They parked beneath a building that didn't advertise what it was. Angelica was escorted inside. No threats, no grabbing, no raised voices. That scared her more than violence would have. The elevator ride was silent. When the doors opened, the space beyond was glass and steel, overlooking dark water dotted with distant lights. Thomas Moretti stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, jacket gone. He wore a black sweater now, sleeves pushed to his forearms. He didn't turn around when she entered. "You paid the hospital," he said. Angelica stopped walking. "How do you—" "I know where my money goes," Thomas replied. "I also know your rent is overdue. and that your mother's insurance doesn't cover experimental procedures. She felt heat crawl up her spine. You had no right. I had every right, he said calmly. You stood in front of a bullet for me. He turned then. Up close, the stillness around him made more sense. He didn't waste motion. He didn't fidget. His eyes missed nothing. You fired me, Angelica said. I removed you from a place where you would be taken, Thomas corrected. Questioned, used, possibly killed. He stepped closer, stopping well outside her personal space. You broke pattern, he continued. People don't do that. They run. They hide. They beg. Angelica crossed her arms. I didn't do it for you. I know, he said. That's why you're here. He gestured to a chair. She didn't sit. I don't work for free, she said, and I don't work blind. A pause. Thomas studied her the way chess players studied boards. Fair, he said. Then here's the truth. He told her about the rival group pushing into his territory, about leaks, about betrayal that had come too close to his inner circle to be coincidence. You weren't the target, Angelica said slowly. Not tonight. No, Thomas agreed. I was the message, and someone inside helped send it. His eyes sharpened. Yes. Silence stretched. I don't want power, Angelica said. I don't want protection bought with blood, and I won't lie for you. Thomas nodded once. Good, he said, because I don't need another loyal soldier. He slid a folder across the desk. I need someone who sees what others miss. Angelica didn't touch it. You fired me from every restaurant in the city, she said. Yes. You took away my choices. No, Thomas replied. I narrowed them. Her jaw tightened. I want conditions, she said. He waited. I don't cover crimes, she said. I don't clean blood. I don't carry messages that hurt people who didn't choose this life. Thomas listened. Really listened. When she finished, he nodded again. Agreed. And I leave if I say I leave. A longer pause. Agreed, he said. What do you want me to do? She asked. Observe, Thomas replied. Listen, manage what I cannot see from my chair. Angelica finally sat, not because she was tired, because she understood something important. This wasn't employment. It was proximity to power, and proximity was dangerous, but silence was worse. Thomas slid the folder back toward himself. You don't answer to my men, he said. You answer to me. And if I tell you something you don't want to hear? Angelica asked. A corner of his mouth lifted. Then I pay attention. That night, Angelica moved into a place with walls too thick to hear the outside world. Cameras she didn't trust. Staff that smiled too carefully. She didn't unpack everything. She never did. The first thing she noticed wasn't the luxury. It was the tension. A house holding its breath. And somewhere inside it, something rotten was waiting to be exposed. Angelica stood at the window, looking out at the water, envelope still heavy in her bag. She hadn't wanted this, but wanting had never stopped truth from knocking. And she had already opened the door. The house didn't feel lived in. It felt managed. Angelica noticed it immediately. The way the furniture was arranged for sightlines instead of comfort. The way the lights were placed to eliminate shadows instead of create warmth. Even the flowers looked disciplined, trimmed into obedience. This wasn't a home. It was a control center pretending to be one. Her room was large, quiet, immaculate. Too immaculate. No dust on the shelves. No creak in the floors. No trace of the human mess that usually proved someone had existed in a space. Angelica set her bag on the bed and didn't unpack. She walked instead. She followed the hallways slowly, pretending curiosity while cataloging exits, blind spots, mirrors that weren't mirrors. She noted which doors required codes and which required keys and which required neither. The staff watched her, not openly, not rudely, but they watched. In the kitchen, a woman twice her age chopped vegetables with mechanical precision. Two men in suits spoke in murmurs by the back door, pausing when Angelica entered. A security guard leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes flicking to her reflection in a polished steel surface. Angelica smiled politely and kept moving. She had learned long ago that people underestimated politeness. They mistook it for submission. By the second day, she understood her role more clearly. She wasn't there to clean. She was there to notice. Thomas didn't summon her. He didn't hover. He didn't test her with pointless authority. That, too, was a test. She reorganized the pantry and found invoices that didn't match deliveries. She noticed the wine cellar inventory showed bottles Thomas had never drunk. She saw staff schedules altered without approval. Security logs that showed cameras disabled for exactly 7 minutes every Sunday at 3:12 a.m. Patterns. She didn't accuse anyone. She waited. On the fourth night, she found Thomas in the kitchen at nearly 3 in the morning. He sat at the island, jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, staring into a glass he hadn't touched. He looked tired, not weak, not vulnerable, just human. "You're bleeding," Angelica said. His head lifted instantly, hand moving toward his side out of instinct before he relaxed. "It's nothing." She stepped closer, already reaching for the first aid kit she'd placed under the sink earlier that day. "Sit still," she said. He watched her with quiet curiosity as she cleaned the shallow cut on his arm. "You don't ask questions," he noted. "I don't need to know everything to do my job," she replied, "and knowing too much gets people killed." "A beat. Smart," Thomas said. She taped the bandage neatly and stepped back. "You haven't eaten," she added. "I forget." She turned on the stove without asking. That, too, was a line she sensed she was allowed to cross. They ate quietly, not like enemies, not like allies, like two people temporarily sharing a truth neither of them wanted to name. "Why didn't you run?" Thomas asked suddenly. She didn't look up. "My brother got jumped when he was 16, she said. 3 boys. They wanted his phone. I didn't run then either." Thomas watched her carefully. "And now?" "And now," she said, "I don't mistake fear for wisdom." Something in his expression shifted. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. The first real test came a week later. Angelica found the device tucked beneath Thomas's car during a routine check she'd insisted on implementing. It wasn't large. It didn't blink. It didn't need to. She stared at it for a long moment, heart pounding, not with panic, but with clarity. She didn't call security. She didn't confront anyone. She went straight to Thomas. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't doubt. He believed her before she showed him proof. That was when she understood something fundamental. Power didn't always roar. Sometimes it leaned forward and listened. The traitor was inside the security team, family adjacent, trusted, comfortable. Angelica watched Thomas make the decision to dismantle a piece of his own structure without hesitation. Loyalty, she realized, wasn't about history. It was about action. That night, as alarms sounded and men were removed from the house in silence, Thomas found Angelica standing in the hallway, arms folded, steady. "You could have died," he said. "So could you," she replied. A pause. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "Yes," Angelica said quietly. "I did." And for the first time since she'd arrived, the house exhaled, not because the danger was gone, but because the truth had been acknowledged. Angelica returned to her room later that night and finally unpacked one thing: a framed photograph of her mother. She set it on the dresser, not because she felt safe, but because she had chosen to stay. And choice, she was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous power of all. The house adjusted to Angelica's presence in subtle ways. Not the staff. They were slower, cautious, unsure how to place her. But the systems did. Schedules shifted. Deliveries tightened. Security patterns grew less predictable. Thomas didn't announce changes. He allowed them. That was how Angelica knew she had crossed from employee to something else. She wasn't invited to meetings, but she was never dismissed from rooms. Conversations didn't stop when she entered, they rerouted. Men who once ignored her now hesitated, unsure whether she was invisible or dangerous. That uncertainty was power. She began keeping a private ledger, not of money, but of behavior. Who interrupted whom? Who avoided eye contact? Who spoke too quickly when Thomas wasn't present? Who grew relaxed when he was? Patterns formed. One name surfaced repeatedly. Marco, a cousin by marriage, not close enough to be obvious, not distant enough to be irrelevant. He handled logistics, shipping schedules, third-party vendors, warehouse transfers, boring on paper, critical in reality. Angelica didn't accuse. She asked questions, innocent ones, questions that forced explanations to tangle. She brought coffee to Thomas one morning and said, Marco rerouted the West Pier shipment again. Thomas didn't look up from his tablet. He had authorization? From you? She asked. A pause. No. Thomas set the tablet down slowly. That afternoon, he asked her to sit in on a meeting, not at the table, beside it. That mattered. Marco spoke confidently, numbers precise, tone respectful, hands steady. Angelica watched his foot tap beneath the table. When Thomas asked for documentation, Marco provided it instantly. Too instantly. Angelica cleared her throat. Every head turned. Those signatures, she said carefully, were added after the invoice was scanned. Silence. Marco smiled tightly. I'm not sure what you're implying. Thomas's gaze never left Marco. Explain, he said. Marco couldn't. That was enough. The fallout was quiet, surgical. Marco was removed from access within the hour. By nightfall, his phone no longer worked. By morning, he was gone. No spectacle, no blood. Angelica felt the weight of it settle in her chest anyway. Later, Thomas found her standing on the terrace, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the dark water. You did the right thing, he said. I know, she replied. That doesn't mean it's easy. He nodded. Nothing worth keeping is. She turned to face him. This is where I draw a line, Angelica said. I help you see. I help you choose, but I don't become the reason people disappear. Thomas studied her for a long moment. If you ever become that reason, he said quietly, you should leave. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The external pressure came 2 days later, a message delivered through intermediaries. Polite, formal, dangerous, a request for a public meeting, neutral ground, high visibility, no weapons, a charity gala. They want you in a room full of witnesses, Angelica said after reading the details. That means they don't plan to shoot you. What do they plan? Thomas asked. They plan to trap you, she said. Legally, socially, or quietly? Thomas leaned back in his chair. And your recommendation? Angelica hesitated, then spoke. I should be there. No, Thomas said immediately. Yes, she countered. They won't look at me. They never do. He stood, pacing. It's too dangerous. So is being predictable, she replied. Silence stretched between them, taut and charged. What would you do? He asked. Angelica met his eyes. I would listen, she said, and I would stop whatever they're planning before it happens. And if you're wrong, then you pull me out, she said. Immediately. He considered her. Not as a subordinate, as an equal. Conditions, he said finally. Angelica nodded. Mine still stand, and one of mine, Thomas added. If you sense danger, you leave. You don't stay to save me. She didn't answer immediately. That's not a condition, she said at last. That's a hope. He exhaled slowly. Fine, he said. But we do this my way. That night, Angelica stood in front of a mirror, dressed in a server's uniform identical to dozens of others. Invisible again. She pressed the small earpiece into place, fingers steady. As the car pulled away from the estate, she felt something settle inside her. Not fear. Resolve. This wasn't about loyalty, it was about truth. And truth, once invited into the room, never left quietly. The gala glittered like a promise no one intended to keep. Crystal chandeliers threw light across marble floors. Champagne flowed in precise, practiced arcs. Laughter rose and fell in polished waves, rehearsed and hollow. Angelica moved through it unseen. Her uniform blended perfectly. Black vest, white shirt, hair pulled tight, posture neutral. She carried a silver tray of flutes, her expression composed, her gaze lowered just enough to seem deferential. In her ear, the earpiece hummed softly. "North side," she murmured, "near the bar." "Copy?" came Thomas's voice, calm and distant. "I see you." She didn't look at him. That was the rule. Thomas entered moments later, dressed in a tuxedo that turned heads without asking permission. Men stepped aside instinctively. Women smiled with calculation. Cameras angled subtly in his direction. Power recognized power. Angelica watched something else. She watched who didn't look at him. 3 men clustered near a marble column, pretending interest in a painting. Their laughter came a beat too late. Their smiles never reached their eyes. She drifted closer, offering champagne. "Leave the bottle," one of them said without looking at her. She obeyed, lingering just long enough to refill a glass that didn't need it. They spoke in a low, clipped rhythm, not Italian, not English. She caught fragments. Timing, elevator, terrace. Her pulse quickened, but her face didn't change. Angelica stepped away and pressed the small transmitter at her collar. "They're planning something off the main floor," she whispered. "Likely vertical movement." A pause. "Understood," Thomas replied. "Stay clear." Angelica adjusted her route, scanning for exits, for security blind spots, for anything that felt wrong. Then she saw it. A catering staffer she didn't recognize slipped a small device onto a wall panel near the service stairs. His movements were practiced, efficient. Her earpiece crackled, then went dead. The hum vanished, replaced by static and then nothing at all. Angelica's breath caught. A jammer. She turned slowly, heart pounding, and spotted Thomas across the room. He was engaged in conversation, smiling, unaware that his connection to his team had just been severed. The 3 men near the column were moving now, toward him. Angelica's mind snapped into clarity. Fire alarms would cause chaos. Chaos would give them cover. She needed precision. She scanned the room and spotted a service panel half hidden behind a decorative screen. Electrical access. High risk. High reward. Angelica didn't hesitate. She set her tray down and grabbed a pitcher of ice water from a passing station. Her steps quickened, but not enough to draw attention. At the panel, she yanked the screen aside and plunged the water into the open fuse box. The explosion of light and sound was immediate. The room plunged into darkness. Gasps erupted. Someone screamed. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the gala in pulsing red. Angelica ran. She took the service stairs 2 at a time, lungs burning, shoes slipping slightly on marble. She reached the second-floor landing just as she heard it, the grinding halt of an elevator forced to stop between floors. Shouts echoed from inside the shaft. Angelica slammed her fist against the elevator doors. No response. She scanned the wall, spotted the emergency override encased in glass, and smashed it with her elbow. Pain flared, but she ignored it, yanking the lever down with all her strength. The doors groaned open. The elevator car was stuck several feet below, tilted slightly. Inside, chaos. Thomas was pressed against the mirrored wall, jacket torn, blood staining his sleeve. One man lunged at him with a ceramic blade, another trying to pin his legs. "Thomas!" Angelica shouted. Her voice cut through the frenzy. The attacker closest to him turned instinctively. That second was enough. Thomas drove his knee upward, breaking free and slammed the man into the wall. Glass shattered. "Climb," Angelica yelled, dropping to the floor and extending her arm. Thomas didn't argue. He leapt, fingers catching the ledge. One of the attackers grabbed his ankle, dragging him back down. Angelica threw herself forward, gripping Thomas's wrist with both hands. Her heels dug into the floor. muscles screaming as she anchored them both. "Kick him!" she screamed. Thomas obeyed. The grip broke. Together, they hauled him up and rolled onto the landing, gasping. Below them, the remaining men shouted, scrambling. Angelica slammed the override lever back up. The doors closed with a violent hiss, sealing the elevator. Silence crashed down around them. Thomas leaned against the wall, chest heaving, blood streaking his face. Angelica sank to the floor beside him, shaking. "You disobeyed me," he said hoarsely. "You were going to die," she shot back. He looked at her then. Really looked, not as an asset, not as a shield, as the reason he was still breathing. Security flooded the hallway moments later. Police sirens wailed outside. The men in the elevator were arrested, not killed. Evidence had surfaced. Devices, plans, recordings. Thomas rose slowly, then did something no one expected. He extended a hand to Angelica. She took it. As they walked out into the cool night air, flashing lights painting the pavement blue and red, Thomas stopped beside the car. "You're free," he said quietly. "This ends here if you want it to." Angelica looked at the city, then back at him. "I don't want to serve tables anymore," she said, "but I won't sit silently either." A slow smile touched his face. "Then sit with me," he said. "Not behind me." Angelica stepped into the car, not as a waitress, not as a ghost, but as a woman who had chosen her place at the table. Morning arrived without permission. Angelica woke to pale light creeping across the ceiling and the unfamiliar quiet that followed violence. Not peace, just the absence of immediate threat, the kind of silence that waited to see what you would do next. Her arm throbbed where she'd smashed the glass. A bruise was already blooming along her ribs. She welcomed the pain. It anchored her in her body, in reality. She dressed slowly, deliberately, not in a uniform, not in borrowed luxury. Jeans, a plain sweater, shoes she could run in if she had to. Downstairs, the house was awake in the way fortresses woke, alert, efficient, humming beneath the surface. Men moved with purpose. Phones buzzed. Doors opened and closed with muted finality. Angelica entered the main room and felt every conversation bend around her. No one dismissed her. No one challenged her presence. That was new. Thomas stood near the window, speaking quietly to an older man with silver hair and tired eyes. When he noticed her, he ended the conversation without apology and turned to her. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Yes." "A lie, but an acceptable one." "Good," he said. "We need to talk." They didn't go to his office. They went to the kitchen. That mattered. He poured coffee himself, not for show, because it was habit now. "The men from last night are in custody," Thomas said. "Not my people. Not anymore." Angelica nodded. "They won't be the last," she said. "No," he agreed. But they were the loudest. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just heavy. "You were right," Thomas said finally. "About everything." Angelica looked at him. "That doesn't mean you'll change," she said. He met her gaze. "It means I already have." She didn't smile. It was a pattern. "Here's what happens now," Thomas continued. "My name is being spoken differently today. Not whispered, not feared, watched." "Good," Angelica said. "Fear rots judgment." He nodded once. "I want you in the room when decisions are made," he said. "Not to agree, to interrupt." Angelica set her coffee down. "That comes with conditions." "I expected nothing less." She inhaled. "I don't order harm," she said. "I don't erase people. I don't profit from silence. And if someone tries to use you," Thomas asked. "I walk," she replied. Immediately. He considered this. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. "I accept." It wasn't submission. It was acknowledgement. By noon, the house felt different, lighter, somehow. Not because the danger was gone, but because lies had been dragged into the open and left there to bleed out. Angelica sat in on her first real meeting that afternoon. not beside the table, at it. Men who had once ignored her now weighed their words carefully, not because she was feared, but because she listened too well. When someone deflected, she asked why. When someone rushed consensus, she slowed it. When someone used language to obscure, she translated it back into truth. Thomas watched quietly. This was the kneeling he'd never learned to do with his body, only with his attention. Later that evening, Angelica stood alone on the terrace again, the water below reflecting fractured light. Thomas joined her, stopping a respectful distance away. "You could leave," he said. "Take the money. Start over." She considered it, then shook her head. "Running doesn't undo knowledge," she said, "and I won't pretend I didn't see what I saw." He nodded. "I won't cage you," he said. "I know," Angelica replied. "That's why I stayed." They stood there without touching, without promises, without illusion. Two people bound not by power, but by choice. That night, Angelica slept deeply for the first time in weeks, not because she was safe, but because she was aligned. And alignment, she was learning, was rarer than protection. The city didn't notice the shift right away. It never did. Power structures didn't crumble loudly at first. They adjusted. They tested their weight. They waited to see if the ground beneath them was actually moving or if it was just another tremor that would pass. Angelica watched it happen from inside the room. Phones rang more often. Meetings multiplied. Invitations arrived that Thomas would once have ignored. People who had never dared say his name out loud now spoke it with professional curiosity. That was how she knew the danger wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The public-facing event came 3 days later. A press conference announced as routine, port development updates, labor restructuring, charitable partnerships. Boring enough to disarm suspicion. Important enough to guarantee cameras. Angelica read the agenda twice, then a third time. "This is where they try to corner you," she said, handing the papers back to Thomas. "They'll frame it as cooperation. Force you to agree publicly to something that binds you privately." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "And your solution?" "Don't refuse," she said. "Redirect." He studied her. "Toward what?" "Truth," Angelica replied. "But controlled truth." The room went quiet. "You're suggesting exposure," one of the men said carefully. "That kind of light attracts attention we don't want." Angelica met his eyes. "Light doesn't create rot," she said. "It reveals it." Thomas didn't interrupt. That told her everything. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation. Reporters adjusted microphones. Camera operators framed their shots. Politicians smiled too tightly. Angelica stood just off stage, clipboard in hand, indistinguishable from staff. Invisible. Perfect. Thomas stepped to the podium and began as expected, measured, composed, offering nothing unexpected. Then a reporter asked the question, the one Angelica had predicted, about internal restructuring, about allegations, about whether Thomas Moretti would cooperate with an upcoming inquiry. The room leaned forward. Angelica watched Thomas's posture shift, not defensively, but deliberately. "Yes," he said into the microphone. "I will." Gasps rippled through the room. "And I'll be providing documentation," he continued. Voluntarily. Cameras surged. Faces paled. Angelica saw it. The flicker of panic in the people who had believed silence would protect them. Thomas didn't look at Angelica. He didn't need to. She had already handed him the truth. Contracts. Logs. Financial trails. Not enough to burn the entire structure, but enough to force reform. Enough to end immunity. The fallout was immediate. Phones exploded. Allies vanished. Enemies misstepped. But something else happened too. Workers spoke, not loudly, not recklessly, but steadily. Unions renegotiated. Ports reopened under oversight. Deals were rewritten in daylight instead of shadow. Angelica watched it unfold with a strange calm. This wasn't justice, but it was movement. And movement mattered. That evening, Thomas found her in the library, standing between shelves she hadn't explored yet. You changed the board, he said. I changed the rules, she corrected. He nodded. You could leave now, he said. You've done what you came to do. Angelica considered it. I didn't come to do anything, she said. I came because silence would have been wrong. Thomas smiled faintly. That may be the most dangerous motivation I've ever encountered. She turned to face him. I'm not here to be dangerous, she said. I'm here to be honest. They stood there in the quiet, the weight of what they had set in motion settling around them. Stay, he said, not as an order, not as a plea, as a choice. Angelica met his gaze. I will, she said, for now. And for the first time, Thomas Moretti didn't feel like the most powerful man in the room. He felt like the most accountable. Accountability is loud at first. Then it becomes inconvenient. By the end of the week, Angelica felt the resistance settle in, not as open defiance, but as friction. Delays, missing signatures, meetings that ended early, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Power didn't like being watched. Thomas noticed it too. He didn't comment. He adjusted. Angelica watched the adjustment with care. Every reform carried a shadow. Every concession created a new angle for someone to exploit. The pressure came from inside, a coalition of stakeholders, some old allies, some recent converts, requested a private meeting. No press, no record. Neutral location. Angelica read the list of names and felt her stomach tighten. They're consolidating, she said, trying to scare you back into the dark. Thomas considered the paper. They're offering protection, he said. They're offering silence, Angelica replied. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room overlooking the river. Floor-to-ceiling windows, neutral art, coffee served in identical cups. Angelica sat in the room, not as an assistant, not as decoration. As witness, the men spoke carefully. Words like stability and continuity floated through the air like anesthetic. They praised Thomas's recent cooperation, while gently warning of consequences if things went too far. Angelica listened. She waited. Then she spoke. You're not afraid of chaos, she said calmly. You're afraid of precedent. Silence snapped tight. One of the men smiled thinly. And you are? Someone who knows how this ends if you keep pretending? Angelica replied. Thomas didn't interrupt. That was the moment she felt it. The shift from tolerance to threat. The warning came later that night. A car followed her on the road home from the hospital. Not aggressively, not obviously, just close enough to be unmistakable. Angelica didn't speed up. She didn't slow down. She memorized the plate. When she told Thomas, he listened without anger. I can increase security, he said. No, Angelica replied. That teaches them the wrong lesson. He frowned. Then what? The next day, Angelica went public. Not with accusations, with facts. She spoke at a labor forum. She testified at a hearing. She attached her name to the paper trail she'd helped organize. The reaction was immediate. Support poured in from unexpected places. Workers, nurses, clerks, people who had lived their lives being told to stay quiet. Threats came too. Angelica documented them, filed them, didn't flinch. Thomas watched from the edges, restrained by her request not to interfere. This was her choice, and it cost her. Her name became searchable. Her past became public. Strangers speculated. Commentators reduced her to a symbol she hadn't asked to be. One night she stood on the terrace, hands gripping the railing, breath fogging the glass. This is the part they don't show, she said quietly when Thomas joined her. The part where doing the right thing makes you smaller before it makes you stronger. You're not smaller, he said. She shook her head. I'm exposed. He didn't argue. He did something else. He stepped back, not away, aside. He let her stand alone in the light she had chosen. That, more than anything, told her she had made the right decision. Power does not surrender quietly. When intimidation failed, when silence broke, when truth refused to retreat, power changed tactics. It reached for legitimacy. The summons arrived in the form of an invitation that wasn't optional. A closed-door review committee, government adjacent, legally vague, politically sharp, the kind of room where reputations were dismantled politely and buried under procedure. Thomas received it without comment. Angelica read it once and felt the weight immediately. "This isn't about you," she said. "Not really." "No," Thomas agreed. "It's about you." They wanted Angelica isolated, separated from context, framed as emotional, inexperienced, a useful conscience that had wandered too close to authority. "She won't attend," one advisor suggested. Angelica shook her head. "I will," she said. "And I'll speak. This room is designed to break people," he said. "Not loudly, slowly." "Then it's a good thing I've lived there," Angelica replied. The hearing room was smaller than she expected. No audience, no press, just a long table, 5 faces, and a recorder that blinked steadily in the corner. Angelica sat straight-backed, hands folded. "Not defensive, not deferential," they began gently. Questions about her background, her education, her qualifications. She answered plainly. Then the tone shifted. They asked why a waitress had access to sensitive material. They asked who she thought she was. Angelica listened without interrupting. Then she spoke. "I didn't gain access," she said calmly. "I noticed patterns no one else was looking at." They pressed. She didn't fold. She laid out timelines. She connected behaviors. She didn't accuse. She explained. One man leaned back, irritation flickering across his face. "You're asking us to believe," he said, "that you see more clearly than people with decades of experience." Angelica met his eyes. "No," she said. "I'm asking you to accept that I had fewer reasons to look away." The room went quiet. The recorder hummed. When it ended, no one congratulated her. They didn't have to. Outside, Thomas waited. He didn't ask how it went. He looked at her face and knew. "They didn't win," he said. "They didn't lose either," Angelica replied. "Not yet." The backlash came fast. Thomas's holdings were audited. Contracts paused. Projects stalled. Angelica's name was dragged through opinion pieces. She was framed as reckless. Dangerous. She read none of it. She focused instead on what still worked, on who still showed up, on the quiet coalition forming beneath the noise. One night, Thomas found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in dough she didn't remember starting. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. She looked up. "I know," she replied, "but I choose to carry it myself." He nodded. That was trust, not protection. Respect. The city learned how to say Angelica's name without sneering. It didn't happen all at once. It never did. Respect moved slower than outrage, but it lasted longer. Not explosively, methodically. Paper trails that had once been dismissed as anomalies were suddenly re-examined. Oversight committees requested documents they'd ignored for years. Quiet subpoenas arrived without warning. Truth had a way of teaching people how to listen. Angelica became a witness more than a symbol. She showed up when summoned. She answered questions without ornament. She refused offers to soften her testimony in exchange for protection. When asked why, she said the same thing every time. Because compromise is how this started. Thomas watched from the margins. Not because he was afraid of the spotlight, but because Angelica had asked him to stay there, to let the work be seen without his shadow attached to it. That restraint cost him. Projects were delayed. Partnerships dissolved. Old allies tested his limits with polite ultimatums. Thomas didn't retaliate. He dismantled. Piece by piece, he unwound structures that had made him untouchable and replaced them with systems that could survive scrutiny. It was slower, harder, less profitable. But it was real. One evening, Angelica returned from a hearing exhausted in a way sleep wouldn't fix. She dropped her bag by the door and leaned against the wall, eyes closed. Thomas didn't speak. He handed her a glass of water and waited. "They asked me what I wanted," she said finally. "After all this?" "And?" he asked. I told them I wanted people to stop assuming silence meant consent. He nodded. That will take time. I know. They sat together at the kitchen table, not touching, not performing closeness, just sharing the weight of the day. I'm not staying forever, Angelica said quietly. Thomas didn't flinch. I wouldn't ask you to, he replied. She studied him then, the man who had once commanded rooms without effort, now choosing each word with care. You changed, she said. So did you, he replied. That was the point. The final hearing concluded 2 weeks later. No grand verdict, no sweeping declaration, just findings, reforms, oversight mandates. Consequences that would echo quietly but persistently. Angelica walked out of the building into cold air and paused on the steps. Reporters called her name. She turned. I didn't do this alone, she said simply. And I don't want a title for it. I want it to be easier for the next person to speak. Then she left. That night, she packed. Not in a hurry, not in secret. Her words began to circulate quietly, quoted, shared, referenced in places she never expected. She let truth travel on its own. Across the city, Thomas Moretti learned how to live inside limits. It was harder than ruling without them. Some people left. Some tested him. A few tried to pull him back toward the shadows. He refused, not because he had become good, but because he had become accountable. The structures he dismantled stayed dismantled. The systems he rebuilt held, not because they were perfect, but because they were visible. He never spoke Angelica's name in public. He didn't need to. Months later, they met once, by accident. A small restaurant, neutral ground, no security in sight. Thomas did not approach. She did. They spoke like people who had already said everything important. How are you? He asked. Whole, she replied. He smiled. Not the old sharp one. Something quieter. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't make promises. When they parted, it felt complete. Angelica returned to her table, ordered coffee, and watched the room. No one avoided it. No one feared it. It was just a table, and that was the victory. Because the real shift had never been about who sat at the head. It had been about who was finally allowed to speak. Angelica finished her coffee and stood. Outside the world waited, imperfect, unfinished, still capable of harm, but also capable of listening. She stepped into it without needing permission. Power doesn't fall when it's attacked. It changes when it's seen. Silence is often mistaken for weakness, but sometimes it's simply patience, waiting for the moment when speaking becomes an act of moral courage. And sometimes the person who changes everything is the one everyone thought didn't matter at all. If this story moved you, challenged you, or stayed with you longer than you expected, subscribe for more cinematic stories where silence breaks, truth rises, and power is forced to listen.